What happens when an unbreakable spirit meets unbearable arrogance? For Alice Rossi, a 22-year-old waitress drowning in debt and family medical bills, her breaking point came in the form of a $3,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux, not served but deliberately poured onto the floor at her feet by Jonas Croft, the notoriously cruel heir to the Croft Holdings empire. He thought a roll of cash and a demeaning order to "clean it up, little girl" would be the end of her. He was wrong. He didn't know one other person was watching from the shadows, the one man whose opinion mattered more than all the money in the world. This isn't a story about a spilled glass of wine. It's about how the quietest person in the room can have the loudest impact, and how one act of public humiliation became the most spectacular job interview in New York City history. The air in Aurelia, one of Tribeca's most exclusive restaurants, was thick with the scent of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and the low, confident hum of power. For the patrons, it was a sanctuary. For Alice Rossi, it was a battlefield. Every night she donned her crisp black uniform like a suit of armor, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face a mask of serene professionalism. But beneath the surface, a war was raging. Alice, or Bella, as her mother called her, was not just a waitress. She was a third-year architecture student at Cooper Union, one of the city's most prestigious and demanding programs. Her scholarship covered tuition, but not the city's crushing rent, and certainly not the mounting medical bills for her mother Maria, whose multiple sclerosis was a relentless, degenerative thief. Every perfectly plated dish of seared scallops, every flawlessly poured glass of vintage Bordeaux was a small victory against the tide of debt threatening to pull her under. Her hands steady as they carried trays laden with crystal and porcelain were the same hands that spent daylight hours sketching blueprints for sustainable urban housing. She saw the city not as a playground for the rich, but as a complex organism, a puzzle of steel and glass that she dreamed of solving, of making better, more humane. Her notebooks were filled with designs for community centers and green spaces, ideas that felt a million miles away from the gilded cage of Aurelia. Tonight was a Tuesday, typically a slower evening, but the restaurant was buzzing. A rumor had circulated through the staff. Jonas Croft was coming in. The name alone was enough to curdle the mood in the kitchen. Jonas Croft was the 28-year-old heir to Croft Holdings, a real estate behemoth that owned half the skyscrapers in Manhattan. He was a creature of tabloids and gossip columns, famous for his supermodel girlfriends, his fleet of neon-colored sports cars, and a sneering arrogance that could wilt the hardest of souls. He treated service staff like furniture, inanimate objects for his convenience, and often his amusement. The senior staff had a system: whoever drew the short straw got the Croft table. Tonight the straw was drawn by a new hostess who, unaware of the stakes, assigned the reservation to Alice's section. Her station partner, a weary veteran named David, gave her a sympathetic look. "Just keep your head down, Bella. Don't make eye contact unless you have to. Agree with everything he says, even if he tells you the sky is green. Get him in and out. Survive." Alice nodded, her stomach twisting into a familiar knot of anxiety. She wasn't afraid of hard work, but she loathed the casual cruelty of men like Jonas Croft. They moved through the world with an unearned confidence, leaving a wake of quiet humiliation for people like her. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and reminded herself of the goal: Maria's next round of medication. That was all that mattered. As she refilled water glasses at a nearby table, she saw them arrive. Jonas was exactly as the pictures portrayed him, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit, his blonde hair artfully disheveled. He was flanked by two other men who mirrored his smug energy, and two women who looked more like accessories than companions, their laughter brittle and loud. They slid into the plush velvet booth in her section, their voices immediately drowning out the sophisticated ambiance. Jonas didn't look at her as she approached. He was already snapping his fingers, a gesture of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "Wine list," he commanded, his eyes fixed on one of the women. "And not the cheap menu you give the tourists. I want to see the reserve list. Now." Alice's training kicked in. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice even and calm. She retrieved the heavy leather-bound reserve list, a tome filled with wines that cost more than her semester's rent. He snatched it from her hand without a word of thanks. His friends were already making crass jokes, their laughter echoing in the refined space. Alice stood patiently, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. She was a ghost, a servant. That was the role. But tonight, the weight of the tray in her hands felt heavier than ever, burdened not by plates, but by the suffocating reality of her world colliding with his. Jonas skimmed the wine list with performative boredom, his finger tracing down the list of legendary vintages. He wasn't choosing a wine. He was choosing a price tag, a number that would impress his sycophantic friends. "We'll start with the 95 Chateau Margaux," he announced, tossing the list onto the table. He finally looked at Alice, his blue eyes cold and appraising. "And make sure it's decanted properly. I sent a bottle back last week at Le Bernardin because some amateur couldn't tell the difference between breathing and drowning." "An excellent choice, sir," Alice replied, her voice betraying no emotion. "The 95 Margaux, $200 a bottle." Her hands felt clammy. A mistake with a bottle that expensive could cost her a month's salary. She retreated to the sommelier station, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The restaurant's sommelier, a kind Frenchman named Jean-Pierre, gave her a reassuring nod as he retrieved the bottle from the temperature-controlled cellar. "Be careful, my dear," he whispered, presenting the bottle to her as if it were a holy relic. "He is a piranha, this one." Alice carried the bottle and the crystal decanter to the table on a silver tray. The ritual was one she had practiced countless times. She presented the bottle to Jonas, announced the name and vintage, and expertly removed the cork. The rich, earthy aroma of black currants and cedar filled the air. She poured a small amount into his glass for him to taste. He swirled the deep crimson liquid, held it to his nose with the air of a connoisseur, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for an uncomfortably long moment. His eyes narrowed. His friends watched him, waiting for the verdict. "It's acceptable," he finally declared, a smirk playing on his lips. Alice began the delicate process of decanting the wine, pouring it in a slow, steady stream to separate the liquid from the sediment. The table had fallen into a rare moment of silence, all eyes on the ruby-red river flowing from the bottle to the decanter. It was in that focused silence that Jonas decided to strike. As she was completing the pour, holding the nearly empty bottle aloft, he shifted his leg abruptly, deliberately knocking the small service table she was using. The table wobbled violently. The decanter, now full of the priceless wine, tilted. Alice's reflexes were fast. She managed to grab the decanter, saving its contents, but the bottle itself slipped from her other hand. It didn't shatter. It landed on the thick Persian rug, and the last few ounces of the threat $200 wine bled out, creating a dark, ugly stain on the cream-colored fibers. A collective gasp came from the table. "Clumsy oaf," one of Jonas's friends sneered. Jonas leaned back in his booth, a look of theatrical disgust on his face. "My God, did you see that? You nearly spilled the entire thing. On my suit." "I apologize, sir," Alice said, her voice tight. The table was knocked. "Are you accusing me of something?" Jonas interrupted, his voice rising, drawing the attention of nearby diners. "Are you saying this was my fault? A waitress who probably makes less in a month than this bottle costs is telling me it's my fault. The blood drained from Alice's face. This was the trap. He had engineered this moment. It wasn't about the spilled wine. It was about the power dynamic. It was a game, and she was the pawn. No, sir, of course not. It was an accident. I will inform the manager, she said, trying to de-escalate. Jonas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, we don't need a manager. We can handle this right here. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick money clip, peeling off several $100 bills. He crumpled them into a ball and tossed them onto the floor next to the wine stain. There, he said, his voice dripping with venom. That should cover the mess. Now be a good girl and clean it up. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. He wasn't just asking her to have the stain cleaned. He was gesturing to the floor, to the crimson blotch on the rug. He wanted her to get on her hands and knees, in front of everyone. Alice stood, frozen, her mind reeling. Every fiber of her being screamed in protest. Her pride, her dignity, the memory of her mother, teaching her to always hold her head high. It all collided with the stark reality of her situation. She needed this job. Arguing would get her fired. Refusing would get her fired. Complaining would get her fired. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and shameful. She could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on her, some pitiful, some scornful, some morbidly curious. Jonas's friends were smirking, phones subtly angled, as if to capture the moment. He leaned forward, his voice a low, menacing whisper. What's the matter? Is the job too difficult for you? Get on your knees and clean up the mess you made. The world narrowed to that dark red stain on the floor. It was a stain on the restaurant's rug, but it felt like a stain on her very soul. With a shuddering breath, Alice slowly, reluctantly began to bend her knees. Time seemed to slow down as Alice's knees bent the floor, rushing up to meet her. The hushed whispers of the other patrons faded into a dull roar in her ears. Humiliation was a physical thing, a cold wave washing over her, stealing the air from her lungs. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the wad of cash, her mind screaming a litany of protests that her mouth dared not voice. This was it. This was the price of her mother's medicine. This was the cost of her dream. But just as her knees were about to touch the plush rug, a voice, calm but resonant with absolute authority, cut through the tense silence. That's enough! The two words were not shouted, but they landed with the force of a gavel. Every head in the restaurant turned towards a small, secluded table in the corner, a table that had gone unnoticed amidst the drama. Sitting there was a man in his late 60s. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored grey suit, no tie. He had a shock of silver hair, and his face, though lined with age, held eyes that were sharp, intelligent, and currently blazing with a cold fire. He held a glass of whiskey, which he gently set down on the table. Jonas Croft's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of stunned recognition, then sheer panic. "Father," he stammered, his voice suddenly stripped of all its bravado. "What are you? I didn't know you were here." Adrian Croft, the founder and CEO of Croft Holdings, the architect of a global empire, rose slowly to his feet. He ignored his son completely. His gaze was fixed on Alice, who was still frozen in a half-crouch, her eyes wide with confusion. "Stand up, young lady," Adrian said, his tone gentle but firm. Alice straightened up as if pulled by an invisible string. She looked from the powerful older man to his cowering son, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening jolt. Adrian Croft walked over to the table, his movements deliberate and measured. The entire restaurant was silent, watching the unfolding of a private drama in a very public space. He stopped beside Alice, then bent down himself, not with the creak of old age, but with a fluid, dignified motion, and picked up the crumpled $100 bills from the floor. He smoothed them out on the table before turning his ice-cold gaze on his son. "My entire life," Adrian began, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room, "I have worked to build a name. The name Croft was meant to be a symbol of integrity, of strength, of quality. We build things that last. We build foundations." He paused, looking around at Jonas's friends, who were now staring intently at their plates. "And you, Jonas, in 5 short minutes have used that name to do nothing but try and tear someone down." "Father, it was just a joke," Jonas mumbled, his face pale. "The waitress was clumsy. I saw what happened." Adrian cut him off, his voice like a chipping stone. "I saw you knock the table. I saw you invent a narrative to belittle a young woman who was doing her job with more grace and professionalism than you have displayed in your entire life. You didn't just spill wine. You tried to ruin her dignity." Adrian then turned back to Alice. He looked at her not as a waitress, but as a person. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the rigid set of her jaw that spoke of resilience, the subtle trembling of her hands that betrayed the emotional toll of the last few minutes. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alice Rossi, sir," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Alice Rossi," he repeated, as if committing it to memory. "Tell me, Ms. Rossi, do you enjoy this line of work?" Alice was taken aback by the question. "It's an honorable job, sir. It pays my bills." "That's not what I asked," Adrian said, his eyes searching her face. "I asked if you enjoy it. What is it you want to do? What is your foundation made of?" Something inside Alice, a dam of professional restraint, finally broke. The architect, the dreamer she kept hidden beneath the waitress's apron, spoke up. "I'm a student at Cooper Union," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm studying architecture. I want to build things, sir. Things that matter. Community housing, public parks, structures that serve people, not just decorate the skyline." A flicker of genuine interest sparked in Adrian Croft's eyes. Cooper Union, architecture. He saw it then, the steel hidden beneath her quiet demeanor. He nodded slowly. "I see." He turned his back on his son and addressed Alice directly, his voice clear and unwavering for all to hear. "The restaurant industry is about to lose a very competent employee, Ms. Rossi. My company, Croft Holdings, has a junior development program for promising young talent. The position comes with a full salary benefits and a tuition assistance program. It starts at $90,000 a year." A collective audible gasp swept through the restaurant. Alice's mind went blank. She couldn't have heard him correctly. $90,000. Tuition assistance. Jonas's jaw dropped. "Father, you can't be serious. She's a waitress. You can't just—" Adrian Croft held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "I am the CEO of my company, Jonas. I can and I will hire anyone I deem to have the character and potential to uphold its values. In the last 10 minutes, Ms. Rossi has shown more integrity, poise, and resilience under pressure than I have seen from you in 10 years. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. He offered it to Alice. "My executive assistant is named Chloe. Her number is on that card. Call her tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Your interview was tonight. The job is yours if you want it." Alice stared at the card, at the embossed name, Adrian Croft, her world tilting on its axis. With a hand that shook uncontrollably, she took it. "As for you, Jonas," Adrian said, turning back to his son with a look of profound disappointment. "Your company credit cards are cancelled. The keys to the penthouse and the Ferrari are to be on my desk in the morning. You're cut off. Do you want the Croft lifestyle? It's time you learned what it means to earn it." Without another word, Adrian Croft paid his bill. In cash, gave Alice a final respectful nod and walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind a stunned silence, a fuming, humiliated air, and a young waitress clutching a business card that was not just a job offer, but a lifeline she never knew existed. The next morning, Alice woke up feeling as though the entire previous night had been an elaborate stress-induced dream. The business card, however, was real. It sat on her small, cluttered nightstand, the crisp white stock and elegant black font, a stark contrast to her humble Queen's apartment. She stared at it, the name Adrian Croft seeming to pulse with a terrifying, exhilarating energy. Doubt gnawed at her. Was it a real offer, or was it some grand theatrical gesture from a billionaire to teach his son a lesson, a promise that would evaporate in the light of day? Her mother Maria, sensing her hesitation, looked at her from the worn armchair in their living room. "Bella," Maria said, her voice gentle but firm. "Men like that, the old one, they don't say things they don't mean. He saw you. Not the uniform, but you. You have to call." Bolstered by her mother's faith, Alice dialed the number at precisely 9 a.m. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. "Chloe Jensen, Mr. Croft's office." "Hello," Alice stammered. "My name is Alice Rossi. Mr. Croft gave me this number last night. He mentioned a job." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Ah, Ms. Rossi. Yes. Mr. Croft said you would be calling. He's already had HR draw up your preliminary contract. Can you be at Croft Tower on Park Avenue at 11:00 a.m. for onboarding?" Alice nearly dropped the phone. It was real. 2 hours later, she stood at the foot of Croft Tower, a monolithic skyscraper of black glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was a building she had studied, a marvel of engineering and a symbol of corporate power. Stepping through the revolving doors was like entering another dimension. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and soaring ceilings, filled with people in expensive suits, moving with brisk, silent purpose. It was a world away from the clatter and controlled chaos of Aurelia. She felt utterly out of place in her best and only blazer, which suddenly felt cheap and ill-fitting. The security guard eyed her suspiciously until she stated her appointment, at which point his demeanor changed instantly. She was given a temporary access badge and directed to the 75th floor, the executive level. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. When the doors opened, she was greeted by Chloe Jensen, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 30s, who gave her a warm, reassuring smile. "Alice, welcome. Mr. Croft is in a board meeting, but he asked me to get you settled. We're all very excited to have you." Chloe led her through a maze of glass-walled offices with panoramic views of the city. The air hummed with a quiet intensity. This was the heart of the empire. Chloe showed her to what would be her new desk. It was in an open-plan area with 4 other junior developers. It had a sleek computer, 2 monitors, and a view that stretched all the way to the Statue of Liberty. Alice had only ever seen views like this in movies. Her new colleagues offered polite, if cool, welcomes. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the unspoken questions. Who was she? Where did she come from? The corporate grapevine was ruthlessly efficient, and she knew it was only a matter of time before the story of the waitress from Aurelia began to circulate. The chill became a palpable frost when she was introduced to her direct supervisor, a senior project manager named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a man in his late 40s with a severe haircut and an air of perpetual impatience. He had clawed his way up the corporate ladder and had a deep-seated resentment for anyone who didn't follow the same arduous path. "Rossi," he said, barely looking up from his computer screen. "I read your file, or the lack thereof. No internship at a competitor firm, no MBA, just a restaurant and an unfinished architecture degree." He finally met her eyes, and he was devoid of warmth. "Let's be clear. Adrian Croft signs the check, so what he says goes. But on my team, you earn your spot. You will be held to the same standard as everyone else. Don't expect any special treatment." "I wouldn't, sir," Alice said, her chin held high. "I only expect a chance to prove myself." Marcus grunted, unconvinced. "You'll get it. We're sending you to the archives for the first few weeks. You need to familiarize yourself with every failed project, every zoning variance denial, and every over-budget catastrophe from the last 20 years. It's grunt work, but it's necessary." Alice knew what this was. It was a test. He was sending her to the corporate basement, burying her in paperwork, hoping she would quit. As she was settling at her desk, a commotion near the elevators drew everyone's attention. Jonas Croft stormed onto the floor. He was dressed not in a suit, but in jeans and a wrinkled shirt. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. He strode through the office, ignoring the startled greetings from employees, and made a beeline for Alice's desk. He slammed his hands down on the polished surface, making her jump. His face was inches from hers, his voice a venomous hiss that a dozen people could overhear. "You," he seethed. "You think you've won. You think you can waltz in here and take my place. My father might be a sentimental old fool, but this is my world. These are my walls." He gestured around the vast office. "You're a novelty, a little charity project. You don't belong here. And I'm going to make sure everyone in this building knows exactly what you are, a girl who cleans up messes from the floor. You'll be gone in a month." Before Alice could even formulate a response, Marcus Thorne was at his side. "Jonas, this isn't the place." Jonas scoffed, shoving Marcus aside. "Stay out of this, Thorne." He turned back to Alice, his eyes burning with a hateful fire. "Enjoy the view while it lasts, waitress." With that, he stormed off towards his father's office, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Alice sat at her desk the entire floor, pretending not to stare, her new beginning already feeling like a battlefield. She was no longer just fighting for a paycheck. She was fighting for her right to even be in the room. The glass tower felt less like a dream come true, and more like a prison where she was on display for all to judge. The corporate archives were exactly as Marcus Thorne had intended, a soul-crushing purgatory. Located in the sub-basement of Croft Tower, it was a windowless, climate-controlled cavern filled with endless rows of rolling metal shelves. The air was dry and smelled of old paper and dust. For 2 weeks, Alice's world was reduced to beige file folders, faded blueprints, and the low hum of the ventilation system. It was a deliberate attempt to isolate and break her. While the other junior developers were attending strategy meetings and shadowing site visits, Alice was tasked with digitizing 2 decades of project failures. Marcus gave her the work with a dismissive wave. "Log everything. Zoning board minutes, environmental impact reports, budget overruns. I want a searchable database." It was a Herculean task, designed to take months. But Marcus Thorne, and by extension, Jonas, had fundamentally misunderstood Alice Rossi. They saw a waitress, someone accustomed to taking orders. They didn't see the architect, the problem solver, who thrived on detail and structure. To them, the archives were a punishment. To Alice, they were a classroom. She didn't just scan the documents, she read them. She devoured them. She learned the secret history of Croft Holdings, not the polished version from the annual reports, but the real story, written in the ink of failed bids and rejected proposals. She saw patterns. She saw how a small zoning miscalculation in the 90s led to $1 billion project being scrapped. She saw how a community protest, initially dismissed as a nuisance, eventually derailed the development of a luxury condo complex in the Bronx. She wasn't just building a database, she was building an education. She worked with a quiet, ferocious intensity, arriving before anyone else, and leaving long after the executive floors had gone dark. She organized the data, not just by date, but by type of failure, political, structural, financial, environmental. She created cross-referenced charts and summaries, her architectural mind seeing the framework of failure, the stress points where grand visions had collapsed. One project in particular caught her eye, the Hudson Yards Overlook. It was a proposal from a decade ago to redevelop a derelict parcel of industrial land on the far west side, a notoriously difficult area plagued by zoning nightmares and contaminated soil. Adrian Croft himself had championed the project, envisioning a mixed-use space with affordable housing, public green space, and a community arts center. It was a project with a soul, but it had failed, spectacularly defeated by a coalition of local activists and insurmountable cleanup costs. The file was inches thick, a testament to a noble failure. It was the kind of project she dreamed of designing. While Alice toiled in the basement, Jonas was waging a campaign of psychological warfare on the floors above. He had been given a meaningless non-executive title by his father, consultant, and a small windowless office. He used his time to sow seeds of doubt about Alice. He would accidentally let slip in the break room that she was hired as a publicity stunt. He'd loudly recall the hilarious story of the spilled wine at Aurelia. He made sure the nickname Waitress stuck a constant, condescending whisper that followed her whenever she had to go upstairs. Marcus Thorne was his willing accomplice, ensuring Alice was excluded from team lunches and project briefings. On the rare occasions she was in a meeting, he would pointedly ask questions far beyond the scope of her supposed experience, trying to trip her up. But Alice had a secret weapon, the archives. In one meeting about a new development, Marcus presented a feasibility report. Alice, recognizing the land parcel from a failed project file from 2003, quietly raised her hand. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice steady, "the soil analysis in your report doesn't account for the industrial runoff from the now-defunct chemical plant that was adjacent to that site. The 2003 geotechnical survey showed significant levels of arsenic contamination at a depth of 15 feet. The cleanup costs alone would put this project $10 million over budget before we even break ground." The room fell silent. Marcus Thorne's face turned a shade of crimson. He had used a recent superficial survey while she had dredged up a forgotten critical detail from the graveyard he'd sent her to. Adrian Croft, who was sitting in on the meeting, raised a single appreciative eyebrow. The tide began to turn subtly at first. Some of the other junior developers started approaching her quietly, asking for her help in finding precedent for their own projects. They saw that her knowledge of the company's past was an invaluable asset. She was becoming less of a joke and more of a resource. The turning point came a month into her tenure. Adrian Croft called her to his office. The 75th floor corner suite was vast and minimalist, with a single massive oak desk and a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city. "Marcus Thorne tells me you've completed the archive digitization project," Adrian said, getting straight to the point. "Yes, sir. The database is complete and fully searchable," Alice replied. "He said it would take 6 months. I enjoy the work, sir." Adrian smiled faintly. "I know what he was doing, Ms. Rossi, and I know what Jonas has been doing. I am not a fool." He gestured to a set of blueprints laid out on a large table. "I have a new project, a personal one, I want to resurrect the Hudson Yards overlook." Alice's heart leapt. "Everyone," Adrian continued, "Marcus the board, the entire development team, says it's impossible. The political will isn't there. The cleanup is too expensive. The community is hostile. They say I'm chasing a ghost." He looked her directly in the eye. "You spent a month studying our ghosts. Tell me, Ms. Rossi, is it impossible?" This was it. The real test. Alice took a deep breath, the ghosts of the archives rising to her defense. "No, sir," she said with a confidence that surprised even herself. "It's not impossible. The old plan failed because it tried to impose a design on the community. It ignored their needs, and the environmental plan was based on outdated, expensive technology." She walked towards the blueprints. "But I found something in the archives, a proposal from a small local environmental firm from 2008 for phytoremediation using specific plants to naturally draw toxins from the soil. It was dismissed as too slow then, but the technology has improved. It's greener, more cost-effective, and it could be integrated into the park's design." She looked at Adrian, her passion for the project overriding any sense of intimidation. And the community? Their primary objection was the lack of ownership. They didn't want another glass tower for the rich. They wanted a library, a daycare, and a fresh food market. If we start with their needs, if we make them partners instead of obstacles, we can build something that lasts. Adrian Croft listened, a genuine broad smile spreading across his face. He had thrown a $100 bill at her feet in a restaurant to test his son. Now he was about to throw a $100 million project at her feet to test her. "Then do it," he said simply. "Form a team. I'm giving you a preliminary budget of $5 million for research, development, and community outreach. Marcus Thorne's team will handle the financial modeling, but you, Ms. Rossi, are the project lead. This is your vision. Show me what you can build." The Hudson Yards Overlook project became Alice's entire world. For the next 3 months, she lived and breathed it. Adrian gave her a small, dedicated team, a young, ambitious urban planner, and a veteran engineer who was tired of building sterile corporate headquarters. They converted a small conference room into a war room, its walls covered in maps, community feedback charts, and Alice's own architectural sketches. Her approach was revolutionary for Croft Holdings. Instead of sending in lawyers and surveyors, she started by hosting town halls in the community center of the neighborhood, bordering the derelict land. She didn't come with proposals. She came with a blank notepad and an open mind. She listened. She listened to the stories of retired longshoremen, of young mothers who had to take 2 buses to find a decent playground, of local artists who needed studio space. Meanwhile, Jonas and Marcus watched from the sidelines, their resentment simmering. They saw the project not as an opportunity for the company, but as a personal insult. Adrian's faith in Alice was a direct rebuke to them both. They were determined to see her fail. Their sabotage was subtle, but insidious. Marcus's finance department would consistently return her budget requests, citing minor procedural errors and demanding endless revisions, delaying her progress by weeks. Important soil analysis results were misfiled. Meeting requests with key city officials were accidentally lost. Jonas worked the social angles. He used his connections to plant negative stories in the press, framing the project as a naive, money-pit vanity project for Adrian, helmed by an unqualified waitress. He whispered in the ears of board members, questioning the wisdom of entrusting a $100 million development to a complete unknown. Alice felt the resistance at every turn, but she refused to be deterred. For every obstacle she found a workaround. When Marcus delayed funding, she partnered with a local university's environmental science department, offering them a real-world research site in exchange for pro bono analysis. When Jonas's press leaks caused a stir, she invited the very same journalists to her town halls, letting them see the genuine community engagement for themselves. She was fighting a war on two fronts, one for the soul of a neighborhood and one for her own survival within the company. The climax was set for the quarterly board meeting. Alice was scheduled to present her finalized proposal and ask for a full budget allocation of $150 million. This was the ultimate test. The board was full of old-school real estate titans men who understood profit margins, not phytoremediation. Jonas and Marcus were counting on them to laugh her out of the room. The night before the presentation, they played their final card. A junior analyst on Marcus's team, loyal to his boss, was tasked with helping Alice compile the final financial projections. Late that night, he swapped a single data file in her presentation. The new file contained subtly but catastrophically flawed numbers. It drastically understated the long-term maintenance costs of the public park and overestimated the rental income from the commercial spaces. The errors were small enough to miss on a quick review, but would be glaringly obvious to the finance-savvy board members. Their plan was simple: let Alice present her dream, and then Marcus would stand up, regretfully, point out the massive amateurish financial holes, and she would be exposed as incompetent, her project and career dying on the same day. Alice worked through the night rehearsing her presentation, checking every detail. At 3 a.m., fueled by coffee and adrenaline, she decided to do one last full audit of the financials. It was her name on the project. She would not leave a single number to chance. That's when she found it. A discrepancy in the maintenance cost projections. It seemed small, but when she followed the thread, it unraveled the whole tapestry. She saw the embedded file name one that didn't match her own naming convention. It was a plant. A cold dread washed over her, followed by a surge of white-hot anger. They had tried to cheat. They had tried to make her fail. She now had two choices: expose the sabotage and create a massive corporate scandal, or find another way. She chose a third option. She would not only fix the numbers, she would set a trap of her own. She spent the next 4 hours creating two versions of her financial appendix, the correct one and the sabotaged one, with the errors now highlighted and traced back to their source. The boardroom on the 75th floor was an intimidating arena. Polished mahogany black leather chairs and a dozen stern-faced board members. Jonas and Marcus sat together, looking smug and confident. Adrian Croft sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Alice began her presentation. She spoke not just of buildings, but of community. She showed them pictures of the people she'd met, quotes from the town halls. She unveiled her architectural model, not a cold, sterile block of glass, but a vibrant, integrated space with a library, a rooftop farm, a daycare and market stalls, all woven into a stunning green park. She spoke with a passion and authority that captivated the room. She had them, then came the financials. And as you can see from the projections, she said, her eyes calmly scanning the room, the project is not only socially responsible, but also financially viable, with a projected ROI of 12% over 10 years. As she spoke, she flashed the sabotaged financial slide on the screen for a brief, calculated moment. It was the signal Marcus was waiting for. He cleared his throat and stood up, the picture of concerned diligence. "If I may, Mr. Chairman," he said, addressing Adrian. "While Ms. Ross's passion is commendable, I must, with all due respect, point out some alarming discrepancies in her financial projections. It seems the maintenance costs have been grossly underestimated. Based on my team's analysis, this project would actually operate at a significant loss. Jonas leaned back in his chair, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. The trap was sprung. Alice let the accusation hang in the air for a moment. Then she looked directly at Marcus, her expression calm, almost pitying. "You're absolutely right to be concerned about the numbers, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Accuracy is everything." She clicked the remote. A new slide appeared on the screen, a side-by-side comparison of the sabotaged numbers and the correct ones. The differences were highlighted in red. "The slide I showed a moment ago," she continued, "contained a data file that was uploaded to my shared drive at 11:47 p.m. last night from a terminal registered to your department. Those numbers, as you correctly point out, are wrong. These," she clicked again, showing the corrected financials in full detail, "are the correct numbers based on my triple-verified data, and they show a project that is not only profitable, but will be a landmark asset for this company for decades to come." The boardroom was utterly silent. She then displayed her final slide. It was a digital audit trail showing the exact time the malicious file was uploaded, the IP address it came from, and the user ID of the junior analyst on Marcus's team. The blood drained from Marcus Thorne's face. Jonas looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. They weren't just caught, they were surgically publicly dismantled with their own weapon. Alice hadn't just defended her project. She had proven she was smarter, more diligent, and more strategic than her enemies. She turned her attention back to the board, ignoring the two men whose careers had just evaporated. The Hudson Yards Overlook is more than a development. It's a statement about who we are as a company. Do we build for ourselves, or do we build for the future? I urge you to approve the budget and let us build the future. Adrian Croft looked down at the long table. He saw the shocked, impressed faces of the board members. He saw the pathetic, defeated slump of his son. And he saw Alice Rossi standing there not as a waitress, not as a charity case, but as a leader. He started to clap a slow, deliberate applause that was soon joined by every other person in the room. The vote was a mere formality. The aftermath of the board meeting was swift and decisive. Marcus Thorne and the junior analyst who had planted the file were fired before. The end of the day, their security passes deactivated their offices, packed into cardboard boxes. They were escorted from the building, a stark and public testament to the fact that Adrian Croft did not tolerate disloyalty. Jonas's fate was more profound. There was no shouting match, no dramatic confrontation. Adrian simply summoned him to his office that evening. Through the glass walls, the staff could see the two of them. Adrian did most of the talking, his expression one of deep, weary sorrow. Jonas, for the first time, did not argue. He just listened. His head bowed. The next morning, Jonas was gone, not just from his consultant office, but from the company. A memo announced he was taking an indefinite leave of absence to pursue personal opportunities. The gossip mill churned, but the reality was simple. Adrian had finally irrevocably cut him loose. He was given a small trust fund enough to live on, but not enough to fund his extravagant lifestyle, and was told to find his own way to build something of his own, no matter how small. He was being forced to learn the lesson Alice had embodied from the start. You are not what you are given. You are what you earn. For Alice, life transformed. The whispers in the hallway died down, replaced by murmurs of respect. The nickname Waitress was forgotten, replaced by her new official title, Project Director, Hudson Yards Overlook. She was given a corner office near Adrian's not as a status symbol, but because he valued her counsel. He treated her not as a protégé, but as a peer. She poured all her energy into the project, and it flourished. The community partnerships she had forged became the project's backbone. The innovative environmental cleanup worked better than anyone had expected. Construction began not with the roar of bulldozers destroying a neighborhood, but with the quiet work of planting trees and laying the foundations for the new library. With her first substantial paycheck, Alice had moved her mother out of their cramped Queen's apartment and into a comfortable, accessible home with a small garden. She hired the best physical therapist and saw the light return to her mother's eyes. Maria would often visit the construction site, watching her daughter hard hat on her head, confidently directing engineers and architects, and she would weep with pride. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after that fateful night at Aurelia, Adrian Croft asked Alice to join him on the roof of Croft Tower. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city she was now helping to shape. Far to the west, they could see the cranes of the Hudson Yards Overlook project, gracefully swinging against the twilight sky. "I never told you why I was at Aurelia that night, dining alone in the corner." Adrian said, his voice thoughtful. "I was supposed to be having dinner with Jonas. He was once again going to ask for a promotion he hadn't earned. But he was 2 hours late, caught up with his friends. So I sat there, and I watched. I watched the staff. I watched how people treated them." He turned to her, his eyes full of a paternal warmth. "I saw you handle a dozen demanding tables with unwavering grace. I saw the way you treated the busboy with the same respect you gave the wealthiest patron. I saw the character Alice. The wine, the humiliation. That was just Jonas revealing his own lack of it. I didn't give you a job to teach my son a lesson. I gave you a job because I saw a master builder who just happened to be holding a tray." Alice looked out at the sprawling metropolis, at the millions of lights blinking on across the 5 boroughs. She thought of the journey, the weight of the tray, the sting of the crimson stain, the cold isolation of the archives, the triumph of the boardroom. She was no longer the girl who cleaned up messes from the floor. She was the woman who drew the blueprints, the one who decided where the walls would go. She had built a new life, not on the foundation of a handout, but on the bedrock of her own resilience, integrity, and unbreakable spirit. The view from the top was even better than she had ever dreamed. Alice's story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by the price of the wine you can afford, but by the strength of your character, when you're treated like you're worth less than a stain on a rug. It proves that dignity is not something that can be taken from you. It can only be surrendered. Jonas Croft tried to humiliate a waitress, but he only succeeded in exposing his own weakness. His father Adrian wasn't looking for another yes man in a suit. He was looking for a builder, someone with a foundation of integrity. And he found her where he least expected it. If this story of resilience and poetic justice resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that your current position doesn't define your future potential. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more incredible real-life stories that prove character is the one asset that can never be bought. What did you think of Adrian's decision? Let us know in the comments below.